My name is Harper Collins, and 5 years ago my husband erased me from his life because of a lie he never bothered to question. According to his sister, I had quit being a doctor. According to her, I had been pretending to work at the hospital while secretly hiding the truth from everyone. She even showed him evidence, screenshots, messages, a story carefully arranged to make me look like a fraud. And my husband believed every word. Within days, he stopped answering my calls. Within weeks, our marriage was over. For 5 years, I wasn't a wife anymore. To his family, I became the woman who lied about her entire career. But life has a strange sense of timing. Because last month, his sister was rushed into the emergency room in the middle of the night. The hospital called for the attending doctor. And when I walked into that room wearing a white coat, my husband looked at me like the past 5 years had just shattered in front of him. 5 years ago, my life looked ordinary. Busy, exhausting, but ordinary in the way that people working in medicine understand. I was finishing my residency at St. Mary's Medical Center in Chicago, surviving on too little sleep and too much cafeteria coffee. My days blurred together rounds, charts, late-night calls, and the constant pressure of knowing that someone's health might depend on the decisions you make in seconds. And through all of it, I believed I had a stable life waiting for me at home. My husband, Daniel Parker, used to meet me at the door when I came back from night shifts. "You look like you fought a war," he would say, half laughing as he handed me a mug of tea. "Close," I'd reply. Emergency department on a Friday night. Daniel worked in finance downtown. His life ran on spreadsheets and quarterly reports, while mine revolved around patient charts and pagers. But somehow it worked. At least, that's what I thought. The only person who never seemed comfortable with me was Daniel's older sister, Emily Parker. Emily had the kind of personality people described as magnetic. She could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. She ran marketing for a mid-sized tech company and loved telling stories about the deals she closed or the clients she impressed. At family gatherings, everyone listened, especially Daniel. I tried to get along with her in the beginning. I really did. But there were small moments, quiet ones, that made it clear she didn't see me the same way. One Thanksgiving, while Daniel was helping his mother in the kitchen, Emily leaned closer to me across the dining table. "So," she said lightly, swirling her glass of wine, "still pretending you enjoy hospital life?" I frowned. "I'm not pretending." She gave me a slow smile. "You don't have to convince me." I didn't understand what she meant. At the time, I assumed it was just another one of those strange comments people make when they feel insecure around someone with a different career, so I ignored it. But looking back now, I realized something important. Emily wasn't just making jokes. She was studying me, watching, collecting details. "How many hours are you working now?" she asked another night during dinner. "Too many," I said, laughing tiredly. "What department are you rotating through?" "Emergency medicine." She nodded thoughtfully. "And you're still planning to become an attending doctor after residency?" "Of course." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's impressive." It should have sounded like a compliment. But something about her tone made my stomach tighten. Daniel never noticed. Or if he did, he didn't think it mattered. "Emily can be intense sometimes," he told me once when I mentioned it. "She's just competitive." Competitive. That word didn't bother me then. But 5 years later, I would realize it described something far more dangerous than I had imagined. Because competition means wanting to win. Emily wanted something else entirely. She wanted to make sure I lost. And when the lie finally appeared, it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from months of careful preparation, small questions, quiet observations, and conversations I thought were harmless. I didn't know it yet, but the foundation of my life was already being quietly dismantled. And the person who would believe the lie the fastest was the man who promised he loved me. The night my life unraveled started like any other shift. It was close to midnight at St. Mary's Medical Center, and the emergency department had finally slowed down. The chaos of the evening patients coming in one after another, nurses calling out updates, monitors beeping had faded into a rare moment of quiet. I sat in the hospital cafeteria with a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold. My phone buzzed on the table. "Daniel." I smiled automatically and picked it up. "Hey," I said softly. "You're still awake?" But the silence on the other end felt wrong. "Harper," Daniel said finally. His voice was flat, too calm. "Is there something you want to tell me?" My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then he said the words that would change everything. I talked to Emily today. I leaned back in my chair. Okay, and? She told me something interesting. The way he said it made my stomach twist. Daniel, I said slowly, what are you talking about? She said you quit medical school months ago. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. What? She said you dropped out, he continued, his voice tightening. That you've been pretending to go to work while actually doing something else. My brain struggled to catch up with the sentence. That doesn't even make sense, I said. That's what I said at first. At first? Yes. My fingers tightened around the phone. What changed? Emily had apparently come to Daniel's office that afternoon. According to him, she looked concerned, worried, like someone carrying a secret she didn't want to share. She said she didn't want to get involved, Daniel explained, but she couldn't keep watching you deceive everyone. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Deceive? She showed me messages. What messages? Messages between you and a friend. My mind immediately jumped to something. 3 months earlier, I had exchanged texts with my colleague Dr. Laura Bennett about taking a temporary research break during a difficult rotation. Emily must have seen those somehow, but those messages never said I quit medicine. Daniel, I said carefully, those messages don't mean what you think. They're pretty clear, Harper. No, they're not. She also showed me screenshots of you talking about being exhausted with medicine. That's normal, I said, my voice rising slightly. Every resident complains about exhaustion. Not like that. I pressed my hand against my forehead. Daniel, please listen to me. But something in his tone had already shifted. The man who used to wait up for me after night shifts was gone. In his place was someone distant, suspicious. You know what the worst part is? He said quietly. What? I defended you. The words stung more than I expected. I told Emily she was wrong, that my wife would never lie about something like this. That's because she is wrong. Then explain the messages. I just did. Silence filled the line. Then Daniel said something I will never forget. Harper, I can't be married to someone who lies about her entire career. The words hit me like a wall. I'm not lying. That's what everyone says. Daniel, you're not even giving me a chance to explain. I gave you the chance just now. No, you gave me accusations. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice sounded tired. I need space. Daniel, I'm serious. My heart started racing. Space for how long? I don't know. You're ending our marriage over a story your sister told you? It's not just a story. Then call the hospital, I said quickly. Call the residency program. Ask them if I work there. He didn't answer. Daniel? I pressed. Finally, he spoke. Emily said you'd say that. My chest tightened. What? She said you'd have an excuse ready. That's not an excuse, that's the truth. But I could hear the finality creeping into his voice. I can't do this tonight. Daniel, please. The line went silent. I stared at the screen. Call ended. I tried calling him back immediately. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Then a third time. This time, the call didn't even ring. A message appeared on my screen. Call failed. He had blocked my number. I sat there in the empty cafeteria, staring at the phone in my hand. Around me, hospital staff moved through the hallway like nothing had happened. A nurse laughed at something someone said. A vending machine hummed quietly. Life continued. But my marriage had just ended in a conversation that lasted less than 10 minutes. And the worst part? Daniel hadn't even asked me a single real question. He had already decided the answer. Because someone he trusted more than me had told him a better story. The next morning, I told myself the situation was temporary. Daniel had been upset before. We had argued about small things like finances or work schedules. Every couple does. So I convinced myself this was just another misunderstanding. Something that would pass once he calmed down. I sent him a message. Daniel, please call me. There's been a misunderstanding. No response. An hour later, I sent another. You can contact my residency coordinator if you want proof I'm still working. Still nothing. By the afternoon, I realized something was very wrong. I tried calling again. The phone didn't even ring. Blocked. I stared at the screen for a long time before slowly lowering the phone. Okay, I whispered to myself. This is fixable. At least I thought it was. So I started doing what any reasonable person would do when the truth had been twisted. I gathered evidence. I emailed Daniel copies of my hospital schedule. I attached a letter from my residency program confirming my position. I even included my department supervisor's contact information. Then I waited. 1 day passed. Then 2. Then 5. No response. I told myself he must be busy. But deep down, I knew the truth. He wasn't busy. He simply wasn't reading them. A week later, I received an email notification. For a moment, my heart jumped. But when I opened it, the message contained only one line. Legal notice. Divorce filing. I read the sentence 3 times before it made sense. My hands started shaking. Divorce. Just like that. No conversation. No meeting. No attempt to verify the truth. He had already made his decision. I sat in the hospital locker room staring at the email while the fluorescent lights hummed above me. 5 years together. 2 years of marriage. And it had ended with a legal document sent through a lawyer. Later that night, I called the one person who might know what was happening. Emily. She answered on the 3rd ring. Hello? Her voice sounded calm, almost cheerful. Emily, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What did you tell Daniel? A brief pause. Then she sighed softly. Harper, I didn't want things to happen like this. What did you tell him? I told him the truth. That's interesting, I said quietly, because the truth would be very easy to confirm. You're upset, she replied smoothly. I understand. No, I said. You don't. I just couldn't watch my brother get hurt. Hurt by what? By someone pretending to be something they're not. My heart pounded. Emily, I work at St. Mary's. I'm literally in the hospital right now. Then why were you texting about quitting? I wasn't quitting. Harper, she said gently. You don't have to keep lying. That sentence landed like ice water. You manipulated those messages, I said. I didn't manipulate anything. You twisted the meaning. I showed Daniel exactly what you wrote. My hand tightened around the phone. Why are you doing this? There was silence on the line. Then Emily spoke again, her voice softer. You were always going to break his heart eventually. What? You cared more about your career than about him. That's not true. Maybe not to you, she said, but I saw it. Her tone was so calm, so certain, like she believed every word. Or at least wanted me to believe she did. You destroyed my marriage, I said quietly. No, she replied. You did that yourself. Then she hung up. I stared at the phone, stunned. That was the moment something inside me finally shifted. For days I had been trying to fix the situation, trying to prove the truth, trying to convince people who had already decided not to listen. But suddenly I understood something. If someone chooses to believe a lie, evidence doesn't matter. Because the lie is easier. It fits the story they already want to believe. 3 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. I signed them without argument. Not because I agreed, but because I finally realized something important. A marriage built on trust cannot survive when one person refuses to hear the truth. And if Daniel believed his sister more than his wife, then our marriage had already ended long before that phone call. So I signed the papers. And then I did the only thing left to do. I went back to work. Because if I couldn't save my marriage, I was still determined to save the one thing no one could take from me. My future. The first year after the divorce felt like walking through fog. I woke up, went to the hospital, worked 12-hour shifts, and came home to a quiet apartment that still smelled faintly like the life I used to have. For a long time, I avoided thinking about Daniel. Not because it didn't hurt, but because if I stopped moving even for a moment, I was afraid the weight of everything would finally catch up with me. Medical training doesn't pause for heartbreak. Patients still arrive. Monitors still beep. Someone always needs help. So I did what doctors are trained to do. I focused on the next task in front of me. Dr. Collins, a nurse would say, stepping into the room. We need you in exam 3. And I'd nod, wash my hands, and step back into the controlled chaos of the emergency department. Inside those hospital walls, my life made sense. Outside them, everything felt uncertain. But slowly, something changed. The longer I worked, the more confident I became. I started noticing how younger residents looked to me during difficult cases. One night, during a particularly complicated shift, a new intern named Rachel pulled me aside. How do you stay calm? She asked. Calm about what? All of this, she said, gesturing toward the busy emergency room. I thought about it for a moment. You focus on the next step, I said. Not the whole mountain. She nodded thoughtfully. I realized then that somewhere along the way, I had stopped feeling like someone trying to survive medicine. I had become someone who belonged in it. 2 years after the divorce, I finished my residency. The graduation ceremony was small but meaningful. My colleagues cheered. My program director shook my hand. "You've earned this, Harper," he said warmly. Standing there in that auditorium, holding my certificate, I should have felt nothing but pride. But there was still an empty chair in the back of the room where someone else should have been. Daniel had once promised he would be there. I didn't let myself dwell on it. Instead, I kept moving forward. I accepted a position as an attending physician in emergency medicine at Lakeshore University Hospital. The work was demanding, but it was exactly what I had dreamed of when I first decided to become a doctor. My new colleagues welcomed me quickly. One of them, Dr. Marcus Hill, liked to joke during late shifts. "You know what I like about working with you, Harper," he said one night while reviewing patient charts. "What? You never panic." I laughed. "That's because I panic on the inside." "Good," he said. "As long as the outside looks calm." Gradually, my life expanded beyond the hospital again. I made new friends. I started running along the lake in the mornings. I even adopted a golden retriever named Atlas, who greeted me at the door every night like I had just returned from an epic adventure. But even as my life stabilized, there were still moments when the past resurfaced unexpectedly. Sometimes it happened during quiet nights when the city outside my apartment window fell silent. Other times it happened during holidays. I would see families gathered in hospital waiting rooms, parents comforting their children, spouses holding hands, and a small ache would appear somewhere in my chest. Not anger. Just the strange realization that people who once knew me so well had believed the worst possible version of me without hesitation. I never contacted Daniel again, and he never contacted me. As far as I knew, he had moved on with his life. Emily probably had too. For a while, I wondered if the truth would ever come out, but eventually, I stopped caring. Because something important had happened during those 5 years. I had rebuilt my life piece by piece. Not through revenge. Not through proving anyone wrong. But simply by continuing to show up every day and doing the work that mattered. By the time the 5th year arrived, I was no longer the woman Daniel had walked away from. I was someone stronger, someone steadier, someone who didn't need anyone's approval to know who she was. And I thought that chapter of my life was permanently closed. Until the night the emergency pager went off, and the past walked straight back into my hospital. 5 years had passed since the last time I heard Daniel's voice. By then, my life followed a rhythm I understood. Long hospital shifts, early morning runs along the lake, quiet evenings at home with Atlas asleep at my feet. Most nights in the emergency department followed the same unpredictable pattern, moments of calm suddenly interrupted by urgency. But the night everything changed started strangely quiet. It was just after 2 a.m. at Lakeshore University Hospital. The emergency department lights hummed softly, and the night staff moved through the hallways with the quiet efficiency that comes from years of experience. I was reviewing charts at the nurse's station when my pager vibrated. Emergency intake, incoming patient. Female, early 30s. Severe abdominal distress. ETA, 6 minutes. I stood immediately. "Room 4, I told the team. A nurse named Linda nodded and began preparing the room. Another resident, Dr. Kevin Brooks, pulled up the preliminary intake information on the tablet. "Looks like the ambulance is bringing her from the north side," he said. "Vitals?" I asked. Unstable but responsive. I stepped into the trauma bay and began putting on my gloves. Moments like these always sharpen your focus. Personal thoughts disappear. Everything becomes simple. Assess, stabilize, treat. The ambulance doors opened minutes later. Paramedics rolled the patient inside quickly. "She's conscious but disoriented," one of them reported. "Symptoms started suddenly about 30 minutes ago." I stepped closer to the stretcher. The patient's face was partially turned away from me. Her hair was messy, her breathing uneven. "Let's get her on the monitor," I said. Linda adjusted the equipment while I reached for the patient chart. Then I saw the name, Emily Parker. For a second, the room seemed unnaturally quiet. The name sat on the tablet screen like something pulled out of the past. I hadn't heard it in 5 years. "Doctor?" Linda said, noticing my pause. I blinked. "I'm fine," I said calmly. But inside, my mind was racing. Emily Parker, Daniel's sister. The woman whose lie had ended my marriage. The woman who had convinced an entire family that I was a fraud. And now she was lying on a hospital bed in front of me. "Vitals are dropping slightly," Kevin said. I pushed the thought aside. Whatever had happened between us years ago didn't matter here. In this room, I wasn't Harper, the former wife. I was Dr. Harper Collins, attending physician. Let's run full diagnostics, I said. Blood work, imaging, and keep monitoring her breathing. The team moved quickly. That's when the ER doors burst open again. 2 people rushed inside, breathless and panicked. I didn't have to turn around to know who they were. But when I did, the sight still felt surreal. Daniel, and his mother. Daniel looked older than I remembered. His hair was slightly thinner, and the confident posture I once knew seemed replaced by something tense and worried. He rushed toward the nurse's desk. "Where is she?" he demanded. The nurse pointed toward the trauma bay. "We're taking care of her now." Daniel stepped forward quickly. "Who's the doctor in charge?" Linda gestured in my direction. "The attending physician is right there." Daniel turned. At first, his expression showed nothing but urgency. Then recognition hit him. His steps slowed. His eyes widened. "Harper?" The way he said my name made it sound like he was seeing someone who shouldn't exist. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room around us continued moving, machines beeping, staff walking past, but the space between us felt completely still. I adjusted my gloves calmly. "Yes," I said. "I'm the attending physician tonight." Behind us, Emily shifted slightly on the hospital bed. Her eyes opened halfway. When she focused on my face, confusion flickered across her expression. Then something darker replaced it. Shock. "Harper." Her voice was weak. "You're a doctor?" I met her gaze steadily. But before I could respond, Daniel spoke again. "You work here?" His voice sounded almost hollow. "Yes," I replied simply. "But Emily said." I know what Emily said. That sentence hung in the air. Daniel looked from me to his sister and back again, as if trying to understand how the past 5 years had suddenly stopped making sense. The truth was standing right in front of him. And for the first time since the night of that phone call, he had no way to ignore it. For a few seconds, the emergency room felt unusually quiet, not because the machines had stopped or the nurses had paused, but because something heavier had entered the room. Reality. Daniel was staring at me like someone trying to solve a puzzle that had just rearranged itself. "You're really working here?" he asked again. I didn't raise my voice. "I've been working in emergency medicine for several years." Emily shifted slightly on the hospital bed, clearly uncomfortable but alert enough to follow the conversation. Her eyes moved from my white coat to the hospital badge clipped to my chest. "Dr. Harper Collins." Attending physician. The color drained from her face. "This doesn't make sense," Daniel said quietly. Linda, standing beside me, glanced between us. "Dr. Collins?" she asked carefully. I nodded once. "Continue the observation protocol," I said calmly. "Let's keep the room quiet for the patient." The staff resumed their work, but the tension in the room hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed shape. Daniel took a step closer to me. "Harper, Emily said you quit medicine." I folded my arms loosely, keeping my voice steady. "She also said I lied about my career." He looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. For the first time since I had known him, Daniel looked uncertain. Emily tried to sit up slightly. "Daniel," she said quickly, her voice thin but urgent. "You don't understand what's happening." I turned toward her. "You're right," I said evenly. "He doesn't." That sentence made the entire room go still. Emily's eyes flickered with something I recognized immediately. Calculation. It was the same expression she had worn years ago at the dinner table. The same look she had worn during that phone call when my marriage ended. "Harper," she said slowly, forcing a weak smile. "I think there's been some confusion." I tilted my head slightly. "Confusion?" "Yes," she continued quickly. "When I talked to Daniel years ago, I misunderstood something." Daniel frowned. "You misunderstood?" "I thought Harper had left the program," she said. The explanation sounded rehearsed. Too smooth. I watched her carefully. "You told him I fabricated my entire career," I said. Emily looked uncomfortable. "I was worried about my brother." "You were worried," I repeated. "Yes. Worried enough to tell him I was pretending to be a doctor." Daniel looked between us. "Emily, you told me Harper dropped out months earlier." Emily hesitated. "I might have misinterpreted the messages." Silence stretched across the room. I could see Daniel slowly replaying the past in his mind. Every argument, every accusation, every moment when he had refused to listen to me. The problem was no longer a misunderstanding. The problem was trust. And trust doesn't collapse because of one sentence. It collapses because someone decides not to verify the truth. Daniel, Emily said suddenly, her voice shaking slightly, this isn't the time for this conversation. She gestured weakly toward the machines. I'm still a patient here. She wasn't wrong. And despite everything that had happened between us, my role in that room hadn't changed. I stepped closer to the bed and checked the monitor. Her condition had stabilized. The worst of the emergency had passed. You're going to recover, I said professionally. Emily stared at me. You're helping me? That's my job. But after everything, this hospital treats patients, I said calmly. Not personal history. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. He looked like someone who had just realized that the last 5 years of his life might have been built on a mistake. Harper, he began. I held up a hand gently. This conversation can happen later, I said. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the patient. But as I stepped back from the bed, I saw the expression on Daniel's face. Shock, regret, and the slow realization that the lie he had believed for 5 years had just collapsed in front of him. And this time, there was no story left to hide behind. Emily remained in the hospital for 2 more days. Her condition improved quickly once the doctors stabilized her symptoms. The medical team ran several tests, adjusted her treatment plan, and by the second afternoon she was sitting up in bed, looking far stronger than she had the night she arrived. But the real tension in the hospital wasn't medical. It was emotional. Word travels quietly in hospitals, especially when something unusual happens. Several nurses had noticed the moment Daniel recognized me. A few residents had overheard parts of the conversation. No one asked direct questions, but the atmosphere around the situation felt charged with curiosity. Still, I kept everything professional. Emily was a patient. Nothing more. On the 3rd day, however, Daniel asked if we could talk. I had just finished reviewing patient charts when he approached me in the hallway outside the hospital cafe. Harper, he said quietly. I stopped. It felt strange hearing my name and his voice again after 5 years. Do you have a minute? I studied his face for a moment. Daniel looked different than the man I had once married. Not older exactly, but more uncertain. The confidence he used to carry so easily had been replaced by something heavier. All right, I said. We walked into the cafe and sat at a small table near the window. The late afternoon sun reflected off the lake outside, filling the room with warm light. For a while, Daniel didn't speak. He stared at his hands like he was rehearsing a sentence that refused to come out correctly. Finally, he exhaled. I owe you an apology. I didn't respond immediately. Apologies can mean many things. Sometimes they mean someone truly understands the damage they caused. Other times they simply mean someone feels uncomfortable with the consequences. I should have listened to you, he continued. You should have, I replied calmly. He nodded slowly. When Emily told me those things, I thought I was protecting myself. From what? From being deceived. I leaned back in the chair. And the easiest way to protect yourself was to assume I was lying. Daniel winced slightly. When you say it like that, that's exactly what happened. Silence stretched between us. People around us continued drinking coffee, talking quietly, completely unaware that 5 years of broken trust were sitting at that small table. Daniel looked up again. I never checked, he admitted. What do you mean? I never called the hospital. I never contacted your program. I never verified anything, Emily said. That didn't surprise me. I know. I just believed her. His voice dropped lower. And I pushed you away without even asking the right questions. For the first time since we sat down, I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger. Just the quiet confirmation of something I had known all along. You didn't just push me away, I said. You ended our marriage. Daniel swallowed. I know. And for 5 years, I continued, you never tried to contact me again. He hesitated. I thought you hated me. That didn't stop you from believing the worst about me. Another silence followed. Finally, Daniel said something that made the entire situation clearer than any argument ever could. I trusted my sister. I nodded slowly. Yes, you trusted your sister more than your wife. He didn't deny it. At that moment, someone stepped into the cafe behind us. A familiar voice spoke. Daniel. We both turned. Emily stood near the entrance. She had been discharged earlier that afternoon, but she still looked pale and tired. The hospital bracelet remained on her wrist. She walked slowly toward our table. I need to say something, she said. Daniel frowned. What are you doing here? I came because this conversation should have happened 5 years ago. She turned to me. For the first time since I had known her, Emily didn't look confident. She looked uneasy. Harper, she said quietly, I need to tell the truth. Daniel's eyebrows tightened. What truth? Emily took a breath. When I told you Harper quit medicine, I wasn't completely honest. The words hung in the air. Daniel's head snapped toward her. What do you mean? I saw the messages she sent to her colleague, Emily continued. But they didn't say she quit. Daniel stared at her. They didn't? Emily shook her head slowly. I assumed that's what they meant. That's not what you told me, Daniel said. I know. Emily, I exaggerated, she admitted. The room seemed to shrink slightly around the table. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. You exaggerated? Emily looked down at the floor. I thought Harper was going to choose her career over our family. So you told me she lied about her career entirely? Her silence answered the question. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly. You destroyed my marriage because you assumed something? Emily looked up quickly. I didn't think it would go that far. You told me my wife was a fraud. I was trying to protect you. From what? Daniel demanded. Emily's voice dropped. From being second place. Neither of us spoke. For the first time, her real motive was finally visible. Jealousy, fear, competition. 5 years of damage traced back to one simple insecurity. Daniel slowly turned toward me. The realization in his eyes was unmistakable. Everything he had believed had just collapsed. And the truth had finally spoken. 5 years too late. The cafe was quiet again after Emily finished speaking, but it was a different kind of silence now. 5 years of confusion had just collapsed into one uncomfortable truth. Daniel was staring at his sister like he didn't recognize her anymore. You exaggerated? He repeated slowly. Emily didn't answer right away. She looked smaller somehow, sitting there with her hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. I thought Harper would leave eventually, she said quietly. I thought if you knew the truth early, it would hurt less. Daniel let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Hurt less? He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. You ended my marriage. Emily opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Then Daniel turned toward me. For the first time since we sat down, he looked directly into my eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. His voice was calm, but heavy. I should have trusted you. I should have asked questions. I should have verified what I was told. I listened without interrupting. 5 years ago, those words would have meant everything. Now they felt different. Not meaningless, but no longer powerful enough to change the past. Daniel, I said gently, I don't hate you. He looked relieved for a moment. Then I continued. But forgiveness and rebuilding a life together are not the same thing. His shoulders lowered slightly as he absorbed the words. I understand, he said quietly. For the first time since the conversation began, there was no argument in his voice, just acceptance. Emily looked between us nervously. I didn't mean for things to get this far, she said. No one ever does, I replied. But intentions don't erase consequences. She nodded slowly. I know. Outside the cafe window, the sun was beginning to set over the lake. The water reflected soft orange light and people walked along the path like any other ordinary evening. Life had continued for 5 years. Even while the truth waited quietly in the background, Daniel finally stood. I'm sorry, Harper. The words were simple, but this time, they sounded sincere. I hope you find happiness, he added. I smiled slightly. I already have. He nodded once and walked toward the exit. Emily remained seated for a moment longer before standing as well. When she passed my table, she hesitated. I'm going to spend a long time trying to fix the damage I caused, she said softly. That's a good place to start, I replied. She nodded and followed her brother out of the cafe. I stayed there a little longer, watching the lake grow darker as evening settled over the city. 5 years earlier, I had believed losing my marriage meant losing everything. But life had taught me something important since then. Sometimes the most painful endings create space for a stronger future. Trust, once broken, doesn't always return. And that's okay. Because healing doesn't always mean restoring the past. Sometimes it simply means moving forward without carrying the weight of someone else's mistake. Later that night, I returned home. Atlas greeted me at the door with the same enthusiastic energy he showed every evening, tail wagging like nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. I laughed and knelt to scratch behind his ears. Hey, buddy, I said. In the quiet of my apartment, I realized something I hadn't fully understood until that moment. The truth had finally come out. Not through revenge, not through confrontation, but through time, and the life I had built while everyone else believed the lie. Final reflection. The value of the story. If there is one lesson in my story, it's this. Truth doesn't always win immediately. Sometimes it takes years, but people eventually reveal who they are through their choices. And if someone is willing to erase you from their life without hearing your side, that says more about their trust than it does about your honesty. The most powerful response to betrayal is not revenge. It is building a life so steady and authentic that the truth eventually speaks for itself. And when it does, you realize something surprising. You no longer need the apology you once waited for, because by then, you've already moved on.